Wait.
No, I know my food's out the microwave.
It's alright. Alright, hi guys. Today I'm going to be doing a reading of a story that I found on the No Sleep Reddit. Actually, I didn't find it. My manager, Emma Kate, did. I'll leave her Instagram and whatever down below if you guys want to go follow it. And it is called, I Think I'm Being Hunted. It's a 4-part series, but I'm just going to make it 2 parts on my channel where I do the first 2 in this video and then the second 2 in the other one. Obviously, I'm not going to do like part 1 and 4 in this video and 2 and 3 in the next one. Oh shit, great. My bra was out.
And restart.
So this is I Think I'm Being Hunted by IsolatedPrey. I'm a single man in his late 20s. I work as a software developer for an excellent company. Thus, I am fortunate enough to be able to work from home. Only once or twice a month do I actually have to go into the office for meetings. My family live about 2 hours away and have a little over 100 acres of land to call their own. My mom and dad have a house there, as does my sister and her husband, with their 2-year-old daughter, and my grandparents on my mother's side. For the last couple years, my parents had been waiting for their new house to be finished. Apparently, they are more than well prepared for retirement. Once it was finished about a month ago, they asked if I wanted to move into their old house. I happily accepted. I took 2 weeks off of work to move in. The moving process only took a few days, so I spent the rest of my vacation just relaxing. For me, that meant working on a personal project. Such is life when your hobby and your career are the same thing, I guess. The town we live in is a decent-sized town. Big enough to have enough to do in your spare time, but small enough to rarely experience any traffic. My family's land is on the outskirts of town and has a very isolated feeling. The only way in, at least by car, is a 2-mile-long dirt road. The land they own is surrounded by trees, and I don't mean just a few. The woods out here are heavy, to say the least. The internet speeds aren't the best, but they're plenty fast enough for streaming Netflix, gaming, and of course working. It's a trade-off I'm happy to make, but over the last few nights, odd things have been happening. It started Friday night. I had settled in for the night relatively early, around 11 p.m. I made sure all the doors were locked, a habit from living in the city, shut down the computer, and went to bed. I always fall asleep to the Netflix documentaries on my phone, low volume with the phone face down. I'd been laying there for about 10 minutes when I heard a rather disturbing sound. Distant at first, it sounded like what I can only think to describe as a banshee. It sounded like a woman shouting in fear or perhaps to cause fear in others, but not entirely human. This wasn't a please help me scream that you would expect. Each shout only lasted a second, with anywhere between 15 seconds to a full minute between. And there were no discernible words, just a single syllable shout. This went on for a good 15 minutes, and the she-demon seemed to be getting closer. The only thing that gave me any bit of relief through the ordeal was that it didn't seem to be heading directly towards me. Sometimes it would be a little to the left of my house, sometimes behind, sometimes to the right. It even sounded at times like it was retreating a little deeper into the woods, but it was definitely closer when it ended than when it started. Now, I'm a very rational person, at least I like to tell myself that I am. I hold no belief in anything remotely supernatural, but this definitely had me second-guessing myself. I got up and looked through the windows of the back of the house to see if anything was visible. The moon was especially bright with no clouds to block the view, so I could see the backyard and the tree line without the need of a flashlight. I, of course, made sure there were no lights on in my house so that if there was something out there, it wouldn't be able to see in. At least that's what I told myself. Much to my comfort, I didn't see anything sneaking around the woods. No shining eyes blinking, no speeding she-demons, just grass and trees. I was finally able to sleep a little after midnight. The next morning, I went into town to get some breakfast from a local restaurant, then to the store for some light grocery shopping, and back home to work. Time got away from me, as it often does when I'm in front of my computer, and before I knew it, 6 p.m. had arrived. My phone rang, interrupting a coffee-fueled workathon. It was my mom calling me to invite me over for dinner. That's when it dawned on me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast, so I accepted her invitation. It would also give me a chance to ask if they also had heard the terrifying she-beast the night before. I brought it up about halfway through dinner. As soon as I finished describing the sound, they both turned to each other, exchanged a quick smile, and started to laugh. It turns out the sound I heard is the same sound a female fox makes when they're in heat. They hadn't heard it last night, but had been surprised that this was the first time I had heard it since moving out here nearly a month ago. I was skeptical at first, but I decided to look it up once I got home. A few YouTube videos was all I needed to corroborate their story. Sure enough, it was the same sound I had heard the night before. With the matter settled, I went back to my computer. Once again, I called it a night around 11 p.m. and went to bed. Fortunately, there were no banshees that night. Sunday night, however, I heard it again. I felt a little silly at first for not realizing before how obvious it was that this sound was from an animal. But this time, it sounded a little different. It sounded more desperate, more fearful than the other night. This prompted me to once again look up the noises that foxes make. This time, I stumbled upon an interesting and slightly chilling detail that my parents had failed to mention. While it is indeed a sound foxes will make while they're in heat, they will also make it to try and ward off threats. And since once again the sound seemed to be changing locations, I'm guessing the fox was being hunted by something. Apparently, they're often hunted by coyotes, which yet another Google search would show that they are somewhat common in our area. Just like the other night, this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes before it stopped. A part of me felt a little bad for being glad that it was over, as it likely meant that the fox had been caught. But it was closer to the house than the other night, thus louder and more annoying. Yesterday, I actually drove to the city I moved from for a meeting. It was the first time being back since I had moved, and I planned to visit some of my favorite places once it was over. In case you were wondering, this is why I worked Saturday. I told my coworkers about the experience, and we all had a good laugh. Once the meeting was over, I spent the rest of the day around town before heading back home. Ended up getting home around 8 or so, watched some Netflix, and went to bed. Once again, I heard a screaming fox. This is where things really started to make my skin crawl, and is why I'm posting here to see if anyone else has had a similar experience. This time, the shouts were coming from just beyond the tree line. Way too close for comfort. The idea of a fox being hunted down in my own backyard really didn't sit well with me. The sound grew louder and closer until it sounded like it was just outside my window. To make things even more unsettling, it was storming pretty heavily last night. I went to the window and separated the drapes just enough to peek through. It was damn near impossible to see anything, at least until lightning finally flashed. When it did, I saw a small red fox darting just out of the woods. A few seconds later, lightning flashed again and the fox darted back into the woods. A few seconds after that, I heard a blood-curdling scream from the poor little animal. Whatever had been hunting it had clearly caught it. The last scream was the most painful sound I had ever heard in my life, but the night still found a way to get worse. I went back to bed facing the window. Not for any particular reason, really. I guess it was just my way of paying respects to the little guy. He, or she, had been a bit of a pest as of late, but not enough that I was happy to know for sure that it had suffered such a painful death. The rain had slowed to a little more than a trickle at this point, but I could still hear it on my roof. But then I heard another sound that really sent chills up my spine. It sounded like footsteps coming from the woods, but not normal footsteps where you may hear some twigs snapping. Each step almost sounded like a shovel going into the ground. They also came in pairs, with pauses between each pair. Shick, shick. A few seconds later, shick, shick. It almost sounded like something was limping, but I wasn't sure what, and I certainly had no idea what kind of creature would have such odd-sounding footsteps. The sounds grew closer, and unlike the shouts of a fox, the footsteps were coming directly toward my house. More specifically, directly towards my bedroom window. The drapes were still about an inch or two apart, but no lights were on in my house. Also, my house is on a crawl-space foundation on not the most even terrain. The bottom of the window was damn near 6 feet off the ground, if not a little more than that. I had never measured it, but I like to think it was a pretty accurate guess. The steps continued until they were just outside my window. We're talking inches away. I had silenced my phone during the fox ordeal so that I could hear what was going on. This was the point where I would regret it. Whatever it was just outside my window. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear what sounded like very light breathing, though it could have been just the wind. At least that's what I told myself until the lightning flashed again. The silhouette of what looked like a tall, thin man flashed against the drapes. I could see not only a head, but also shoulders, and perhaps most terrifying of all, the lightning flash also revealed a small area of fog on the window that I could just barely see between the drapes. And with each quick flash of the lightning strike, it seemed to shrink and grow, like this disturbingly tall person was breathing right against my window. It may have only been a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Eventually, I heard footsteps once again that, from the sound of it, were heading back into the woods. I have no idea who or what this thing was. I tried to tell myself that it was just my dad playing a cruel joke. But my dad would never kill an animal, not even for sport, let alone for a gag. He's also not tall enough to see in the window, nor is he thin enough to fit the profile. The next morning, I went outside and verified that the bottom of my window is 6.5 feet from the ground. Whatever this thing was, it was at least 7 feet tall. And though this last detail may be just my imagination, the silhouette seemed to have poor posture, as if it was slouching. There's no telling how tall this thing is, but I'm hoping it doesn't come back. My parents are having a party tonight. I'm actually heading over as soon as I post this story. I have every intention of drinking more than usual so that I'll have a viable excuse for sleeping at their house tonight. I know it sounds childish, but I really don't want to be alone tonight. I'll keep you all updated if anything else noteworthy happens. Before I get into the details of what has happened since Tuesday night, I want to thank you all for your suggestions and thoughts. I know you're all strangers, but it's quite the relief to know that there is a community of people who believe what has happened. I also want to address a few people indirectly who suggested that this creature is Slenderman. Rest assured, it's not. To be honest, the thought had never even crossed my mind. As one user mentioned, Slenderman is never said to go after animals and kill them. Also, I have no children. Assuming Slenderman is real, which I seriously doubt, he would have no reason to come after me. And to the reader who suggested napalm balloons, I sincerely want to thank you for a much-needed laugh. With that all out of the way, here's what happened since my original post. As mentioned before, I left my house soon after posting that night. It was around 9:30, meaning the sun had set. The moon was out, though, which was a small comfort. I'm not ashamed to admit that I considered not leaving the house at all. Unfortunately, I had already agreed to showing up. If I didn't, it would be weeks before I heard the end of it. I reminded myself of the footsteps and how slow the creature seemed to move. I have no way of knowing if that is the creature's maximum speed, but I told myself that it was possible, knowing damn well it was highly unlikely. I walked around the house and checked out every single window several times to make sure the creature was nowhere in sight. Once satisfied that it was nowhere nearby, I grabbed a kitchen knife and left the house. I honestly don't remember my feet touching the stairs of my front porch, nor do I remember my feet touching the ground on the way to the car. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. I locked the doors, started the car, and took a brief look around to make sure there was nothing to be seen. Feeling safe for now, I made my way to my parents' house. It's worth mentioning that the land my parents own is largely used for boarding horses. For those who don't know what that is, my parents essentially rent out small pieces of their land for people who own horses, but don't have enough land of their own to keep them there. Because of this, I essentially had to drive around the whole of the land to get to their house. A few times on the way, my car's headlights met with the eyes of a horse. Quite unnerving considering the events of last night to see yellow eyes appear out of nowhere. It's embarrassing to admit, but it'll give you all a chance to laugh at my expense. There was one horse in particular, however, that really concerned me. Just like all the others, his eyes met my headlights as I was approaching, and like all the others, he seemed to pay me no mind whatsoever. Once I was several yards past the horse, however, it made a startled sound and went into an instant sprint away from my car. Now, I wouldn't have been surprised if this happened as I was approaching the horse, but the fact that the horse started running after I had already driven past had me wondering if it was running from something else. While it's not unlikely to think that a horse would just randomly decide to run, I wasn't willing to bank on it. I started driving a little faster. As expected, the festivities had already begun when I arrived at my parents' house. A large bonfire was already well underway in the front yard, odd choice for summer, and a number of people had gathered. My parents were there, as were my grandparents, my sister, and her husband. There were also several other people I didn't recognize, of a variety of ages, likely friends of each generation. I exited my car, leaving the knife in the passenger seat, and joined the group. My father wasted no time cracking a joke at my expense, asking, "Seen any of your banshee girlfriend lately?" in front of everyone there. Most of them chuckled briefly, but all seemed to understand how a city slicker may be unaware of things that go bump in the country night. My mom swiftly made up for the minor embarrassment by pointing out that I was a successful software developer and earned a good living. I'm not sure what she meant by successful, as all I had accomplished was getting a job in the industry. I'm far from being the next Bill Gates, but I know when to take a compliment. The night went on well enough. I had a few shots within minutes of arriving, and it wasn't long before I was feeling rather tipsy. That's when my sister decided to introduce me to a friend of hers. Her name is Allison. And though she showed an interest in my career, I'm sure she wasn't as interested as the drunk me thought she was. Still, she's incredibly friendly and never tried to change the subject. Once I had realized how much I was rambling on about myself, I decided to ask her about her own interests. But before she could answer, my sister interrupted to let us know it was time for the fireworks to start. She peeked her head in through the front door to let us know, but not without giving me a mischievous grin and winking at Allison. I decided to ignore the gesture entirely and followed everyone outside. One amazing perk about living out in the middle of nowhere is you're free to do what you want without worrying about the neighbors complaining. I did ask if the horses would get spooked, but was assured they would be largely unbothered by it. I wasn't sure if this was true, but none of them seemed to be bothered once the show was underway. Being an amateur production, each firework had a good minute between so that my father could set up the next one and light the fuse. Then, up into the sky they would go to illuminate our surroundings with flashes of red, blue, green, and whatever other color he had. After the 5th or 6th fireworks, something chilling caught my eye. Off in the edge of the tree line, several hundred yards away, I could see a figure standing almost perfectly still. I could only see him when the flashes went off. It was tall and thin, just as I had seen from the silhouette. Whatever it was, it had no clothes or hair. The skin of the creature perfectly mirrored the colors of the fireworks, meaning its skin was disturbingly pale. It slouched with terrible posture, and its arms seemed long and thin. I saw no ears on the creature, only a large mouth, large enough to fit a watermelon, with a spine-chilling Cheshire cat-like grin. It didn't seem to have any eyes, but it may have been hard to notice given the distance. It just stood there, facing the group for several minutes, a total of 6 or 7 fireworks before finally disappearing with a sound. Allison had apparently tried to get my attention several times, but was unsuccessful. It wasn't until my sister chimed in that I finally snapped out of it. They both asked what had me so enthralled. I lied, of course, claiming I thought I had seen a coyote. A few minutes later, my brother-in-law emerged from my parents' house saying that their daughter had woken up and suggested that they head home. My sister agreed and invited Allison to come stay at her house instead of driving home, who in turn asked if I would like to join so that we could finish our conversation. I agreed, and she suggested that we take my car. We started to walk towards my car, and I recalled the knife in the passenger seat. Not wanting to look like a serial killer, I opened the door for her so I could throw it in the back without her seeing it. I would have suggested walking, but didn't want the two of us to end up as dinner. I'll spare the boring details and skip to when Allison had gone to bed, and I decided to pass out on the living room couch. I fell asleep reading the comments on my first post and saw that someone had suggested getting a security camera. An excellent idea, by the way, and one I decided to act on the next day. After that, I was out like a light. But I did wake up around 3 a.m. with a static sound coming from nearby. This was unnerving at first, until I realized it was a baby monitor on the coffee table. Apparently, my sister keeps an extra monitor in the living room for when they stay up late, and it picked up a noise, causing the screen to light up and the sound to kick on. Don't worry, it was just the sound of my niece crying for my mom. This did, however, give me an idea. The next morning, my brother-in-law had made breakfast. While we were eating, I asked my sister if I could borrow their baby monitor setup for the night. She looked confused, but I claimed it was to test some software I was working on. A lie, of course, but she bought it. After breakfast, I shuttled Allison back to my mom's house so she could pick up her car and save her 2 minutes of walking. A gentleman, I know. She gave me her number and asked to let her know if my banshee girlfriend came back. Apparently, she had been around when my father took his shot. I sent her a message after dropping her off so that she would have my number. The message read, "Just so you know, the banshee and I never made anything official." Smooth, I know. The day was mostly dull after that. A few mildly flirtatious messages between Allison and I for those who are curious, but nothing of importance. I've set up the baby camera in my room on my nightstand, pointed at the window that faces the woods. The very window that the creature was standing outside the night before. I separated the blinds wide enough that the creature's face will be fully visible if it decides to show up. After a long day of anxiety, I laid on the couch shortly after 10. And as if the anxiety didn't make it hard enough to fall asleep, the lack of Netflix only made it worse. I wanted to be sure not to miss out on anything the baby monitor may have picked up. Around 1 a.m., it finally happened. I was on the verge of sleep when the faint light of the baby monitor turned on and the familiar sound of static made my heart stop. Fear had paralyzed my body before I could even roll over to see what the camera was picking up. The static was accompanied by 3 slow, light taps on my bedroom window, then silence. After a few seconds, the monitor light dimmed to its idle brightness, and the static sound died out. I started to roll over to look at the camera, and it happened again. The static kicked in and the screen flared up to reveal what looked like a small white stick poking my bedroom window. Before I could process what I was seeing, the stick lowered and the god-awful face of my stalker slid into the view. Its skin was pale white and pulled tight against its skull. Its mouth stretched ear to ear, save for the fact that it had none. A long, thin tongue hung from its razor teeth-lined mouth, swishing like the tail of a curious cat ready to strike. And its eyes, Mother of God, its eyes, they were large and solid black. I don't know how I didn't notice them during the fireworks display from the night before. All I can think is that it must suffer from profound light sensitivity, hence why it only comes out at night and apparently kept its eyes shut tight during the fireworks. The creature left the window view, and I could hear the slowly growing shick sound of its bizarre footsteps walking around my house. It knew that I wasn't in my bedroom and was looking for me. I heard it stop a couple times, presumably at each window it passed. But when the creature approached the front corner of my house, a light came in through the living room window right behind the couch I was on, and the creature let out a deafening howl of pain and anguish. It was at that moment that I remembered the motion-activated lights of my front porch. The creature's cry was raspy, like it was struggling to breathe. I heard a light thud as it fell to the ground, and could even hear it flailing in agony on the ground. Apparently, it managed to regain its composure and make a break for the woods behind my house. The speed at which it sounded to move was surprising and disturbingly impressive. But at least I was safe, at least for the time being. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep that night. Some of you mentioned getting a gun. Unfortunately, I don't know that I could use one with any level of confidence. I do, however, feel confident with a bow and arrow. What can I say? The Legend of Zelda had quite the impact on me in my younger years. I drove into town to the sporting goods store this morning and spent a nice chunk of change on some archery equipment. I found a good deal on a compound bow, several quality arrows, and a target for practicing. I also went to the local pet shelter to look into adopting a dog that could at the very least bark. Much to my fortune, a German Shepherd was available. I was quite surprised, expecting luck to grant me with an obnoxious dachshund at best, but knew this was the best I could ask for. I haven't decided on a name for him yet, but according to the adoption papers, he answers to Ryder. It sounds a little cliche to me, but I'm leaning towards sticking with it. After all, he's at least 3 years old from what the shelter told me. I spent the remainder of my day in the front yard working on my marksmanship and allowing Ryder to acclimate to his new home. Don't worry, I fired every arrow with absolute certainty that he was nowhere near the line of fire. While my archery skills are not what they once were, it still felt very comfortable. I quickly remembered how much I enjoyed the hobby as a child, and even as a teenager. Naturally, I was reminded of simpler times, firing arrows at a foam deer with my dad providing advice, and our golden retriever chasing the neighbor's cat up trees. For a while, I'd almost forgotten about my nighttime nemesis. After a few hours of practice, I was certain that I could easily hit the creature at a distance of 30 yards. Assuming it suddenly became morbidly obese. The thin frame this creature has will make this rather difficult. My best bet would be to aim for its large head. Of course, I'll keep hoping it doesn't come down to that, but I'm not going to hold my breath. That brings it up to now. It's a little after 8 p.m. and I still have a little time before the sun sets. I'm going to go outside and get a little more practice while I can, now that my fingertips and forearm are no longer screaming. I'll be sure to keep you all updated. In the meantime, Ryder and I will be holding down the fort. Thanks again for all of your thoughts and suggestions. Good night, everyone. Whew, and that was the first 2 parts of I Think I'm Being Hunted. I honestly just want to read the next 2 parts right now, but I will have to keep you guys waiting. I'm probably going to upload the second 2 parts sometime this week, just so that you guys don't have to wait that long to read the last 2 parts. I put it down in the description if you guys want to go finish reading the rest of it, because the 2 parts are on there now. That's fine. Or if you want to wait, that's perfectly fine too. I'll try to probably upload it Saturday. So yeah, like I said, you guys are more than welcome to go read the last 2 parts. I'll leave it down in the description. And thank you to IsolatedPrey for allowing me to read his story. I really appreciate it. So yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!